xét xử. Việt Nam đang nắm chiếc ghế trong Hội đồng Nhân quyền của Liên Hợp Quốc nhiệm kỳ 2014-2016. Quý vị đang hiện diện tại đây để cương quyết không thể để cho chuyện ấy xảy ra. Thế giới đã thấy được chính quyền Việt Nam đang ra tay ngăn chặn như thế nào vấn đề thông tin qua mạng lưới toàn cầu. Nguyễn Tấn Dũng đã ra lệnh cho công an bắt bớ các blogger và dẹp bỏ các trang nhà không cho phép. Nhân quyền Việt Nam thật đáng quan tâm. Hiện Hoa Kỳ là quốc gia đi rất sát với Việt Nam trong lĩnh vực nhập cảng hàng hóa và về phương diện hợp tác quân sự. Chúng ta ngồi tại đây là những người cầm lá phiếu để bầu cho những vị vào làm chính sách trong tòa nhà quốc hội này. Chúng ta phải nói lên phản kháng chính phủ Hà Nội biết có những biện pháp chế tài khi băng giao thân thiện với Hà Nội. Chúc toàn thể quý vị có một cuộc hội thảo quý vị tối. Xin chào quý vị.
She is a former Virginia State Senator and the first U.S. Congressman to be elected to the state of Virginia. She was the author of the resolution H.R. 1330, which designated the nation as Vietnam Human Rights Day. We will always be grateful for her support of our voice in human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Leslie Murphy.
It is so good to be with my friends once again. Last year I had a little illness and couldn't be here to celebrate, so I get to speak twice as long today. We started this 19 years ago, and I was telling Dr. Kwan, in some ways it seems like a long time, in some ways it also seems like an eye blink that we started this. You know, the fact is that the human rights situation around the world is in some ways getting worse because we've come to accept what is going on. In 2005, the U.S. government negotiated with Vietnam over trade. And they didn't demand anything from them. They gave them lots of benefits of trade. They said that we will make you wealthy. And just as we have in other countries in China, we make a few wealthy, but not everybody. We have got to do better. And now, through the Trans-Pacific Treaty that's being negotiated this very moment, it will be finalized in Peru next week. We are once again negotiating with Vietnam. And we are not asking anything about human rights. You know, we cannot remain silent. That's what this resolution was about, not being silent. Governments will tell you to sit down. When they tell you to sit down, you stand up. Governments will tell you to be quiet. When they tell you to be quiet, you speak louder. And our government sometimes tells us to give up. When they tell us to give up, we say, fight harder. Fight harder for human rights in Vietnam. Thank you, and God bless you all for asking me to do this.
Without former Congresswoman Leslie Byrne, we would not have this Vietnam Human Rights Day. Please give a big hand and show
It is my pleasure to introduce to you Congressman Alan Lowenthal, who represents the 47th District of California, which includes the cities of Garden Grove and Westminster. He sits on several key subcommittees on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and the House Committee on Natural Resources. Please give a warm welcome to Congressman Lowenthal.
Thank you so much. Please, shall please. Last week in my district, in the city of Westminster, we commemorated the 38th anniversary of the fall of Saigon and Black April. And today I'm very honored to be here in Washington to commemorate the 19th anniversary of the joint resolution proclaiming Vietnam Human Rights Day. Since I've been in Congress, I've become particularly concerned about the record of human rights violations in Vietnam. Just yesterday, I joined with my colleague, Congressman Chris Smith, to introduce the Vietnam Human Rights Act, and I serve as one of the original co-sponsors on the act. Trade and economic freedom or growth, trade and economic growth should not come at the expense of democracy and freedom. Rather, we as a nation have a responsibility to ensure that liberty and prosperity grow stronger in unison. And this is not something that's just remote to me. I'm proud to represent tens of thousands of Vietnamese constituents in my district, hard-to-be Little Saigon. One of my constituents, Dr. Nguyen Quoc Quang, was only recently released by the Vietnamese government after being imprisoned unfairly for over 9 months. I recently met with Dr. Nguyen in my district to hear his story. And as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives, I recently attended our hearings on human rights, listening to human rights activists talking about human rights violations in Vietnam. These accounts convince me that the government of Vietnam has a long way to go to improve their record on human rights, and that we in the United States must do more to ensure and tell Vietnam that we will not tolerate human rights abuses. I stand with you and will bring that fight to the House of Representatives. But I'd like to also thank all the hosts and the organizers for putting on this event to remind us in the United States of the continuing struggle for human rights in Vietnam.
Welcome, Mr. Ron Patton. He represents the Human Rights Network. Good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here. I'm a lawyer and political prisoner at the same time as Mr. Vietnam Nguyen. Even as a lawyer, I don't talk long. Don't worry. Well, I represent the Vietnam Human Rights Network and it this week, report on the violations of the human rights. We can look at our website. Most options are available. Okay, I would like to waste your time. I'm very short, even as a lawyer. Thank you.
Labor since 2009. He has also served in the Office of East Asian Pacific Affairs, the Office of African Affairs, the Office of International Labor, Business and Human Rights, and the Internet Freedom Office. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Daniel Bayard.
I'm so pleased that this has turned into an annual appearance for me, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Kwan for always inviting me to come back. It's a real joy to be here today to celebrate the 19th annual Vietnam Human Rights Day. I want to thank Senator Cornyn for his leadership, as well as all the other members of the House and Senate who have given their time and effort to make sure that this event can go forward as it has for so many years. I think it's important that we send in a joint signal of how committed we are across the U.S. government to champion the respect for human freedom and human dignity in Vietnam and around the world. I'm pleased to see friends and representatives from Vietnamese communities around the United States and throughout the world who share our support for human rights and democracy in Vietnam. I want to, of course, offer special thanks to Dr. Kwan and Vinh Vu Dong for organizing today's commemoration. Promoting human rights in Vietnam has always been a bipartisan issue, and I can tell you that the Obama administration remains committed to continuing that tradition as we have for the last 4 years. The United States-Vietnam relationship is a dynamic one. Since normalization over 18 years ago, the ties between our two peoples have improved through trade, travel, and the cultural connections reinforced by individuals such as yourselves with deep roots in both countries. The relationship has benefited those on both sides of the ocean, but in particular Vietnamese living in Vietnam, where the standard of living has increased, the population becomes better off, more educated, and savvier about the world and the opportunities available. But there remains a very important aspect that still lags, which is why we are gathered here today. Although Vietnam has become a more prosperous country, Vietnamese citizens still do not enjoy their universally recognized human rights and fundamental freedoms. I had recently returned from Vietnam, where I led an interagency delegation that included the White House and the Department of Homeland Security for the U.S.-Vietnam Human Rights Dialogue. Throughout the course of my 4-day visit, we emphasized the importance of human rights and pointed out that 2013 represents an opportunity for the government of Vietnam to choose to improve its human rights record and afford its people the rights guaranteed under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We acknowledged positive steps, such as the release, albeit with restrictions, of lawyer Lê Công Dinh, such as facilitating the visit of a senior representative from an international human rights organization, and pick up in the pace of church registration in the diocese. We welcome discussions between the government and the Vatican that could improve relations between those two, and also what appears to be potential movement for the rights of LGBT persons in Vietnam. We are watching closely and with great interest the flood of public comments about the draft Constitution, and are encouraged by the government's decision to extend that comment period. It's now incumbent upon authorities to give those comments considered and fair review, and to incorporate the grassroots voice into the revised text of the Constitution. But these steps are not enough to reverse a years-long trend of deterioration, as evidenced by the cases detailed in our recently released Human Rights Report. Nor have these positive steps formed a consistent pattern. In increasing numbers, bloggers continue to be harassed and jailed for peaceful online speech, and activists live under a continual cloud. Activists such as Nguyen Van Dai and Pham Hong Thong, whom authorities prevented from meeting with me when I was in Hanoi. Our concern about the human rights situation touches every aspect of our relationship. Without progress on human rights, there are limits to the levels of development with the relations that Vietnam can achieve and that our relationship can achieve. The people of Vietnam should benefit from a system that provides rule of law with equality for all before the law. The rules should be transparent and accessible to everyone, not arbitrary. Our concerns in Vietnam exemplify the lack of fairness that we see. Let me outline a few of those concerns. Many of Vietnam's more than 120 political prisoners are in jail for exercising their right to freedom of expression. Vu Hoa Vu, whose wife I met with in Hanoi, criticized publicly the corruption associated with bauxite mining and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Tha Phong Thong is in prison for writing online about police corruption. Nguyen Van Hai, or Chit Thai, peacefully expressed his views online and protested his country's policies towards China and is now serving a 12-year sentence. He has posted a video on YouTube. The state has deemed these individuals a threat, a national security concern, a charge clearly unfounded when you sit down and have a conversation with individuals such as Father Lee, whom I was able to meet in prison. When the government arbitrarily dictates the line between what is a real threat against the state and what is not, and when that line is ever shifting, there is an inherent unfairness that stymies development. Development of a modern, developed society, successful and fair country, also requires free flow of information. This creates a synergy of ideas and inspires innovation. Yet Vietnam seeks to control information, even as that control is increasingly slipping out of its hands. We are very concerned about Vietnam's internet policies of blocking, hacking, surveillance, and its detention of bloggers. Draft regulations on the internet content management, in addition to cable TV, seek to restrict the flow of information even further. Nonetheless, Vietnam's internet penetration continues to grow, and the country has seen a blossoming of blogs that continue to attract the interest of large numbers of reform-minded Vietnamese, including Dan Nguyen and Tom Sa Van An. Other websites such as An Ba Sam, which hosted a sophisticated commentary on constitutional reforms and advocated for elimination of national security exceptions to its human rights protections, have been targeted with hacking and disablement. A frequent refrain I hear whenever I visit Vietnam is the need for better implementation of the laws that are already on the books. Constitutionally, citizens have the right to free speech, freedom of religious belief, and other basic rights. Laws guarantee access to a lawyer and guarantee defense lawyers equal standing with the folks they're asking. Reality, though, plays out differently, and I've heard from repeated lawyers of political prisoners who are not permitted to access case files, who are given unequal accommodations in courtrooms, who are not allowed to use computers or tablets, and not allowed to adequately defend their clients. And then there are laws that run counter to international human rights norms, such as Articles 79 and 88, which are used to detain political activists critical of the state. Such imbalances in the rule of law undermine Vietnam's development and undercut its potential. The Vietnamese constitution includes written protection for religious freedom, but we all know that Christian, Buddhist, and other groups face harassment and are not allowed to register. But we've seen some positive steps. There's a lack of fundamental fairness. Two groups that are registered, the North and South Evangelical churches of Vietnam, are not allowed to unite. The new Decree 92, which came into effect in January but has yet to be implemented, could be implemented in a manner that further restricts rather than promotes religious freedom. These are a few of the issues that we raised with the government during the human rights dialogue. We used specific cases to illustrate broader points. Cases like Le Quoc Quan, who's being detained ostensibly on charges of tax evasion. I met with Ray during previous trips, and I was sorry not to be able to meet with him this time, so I was glad to meet with his wife and sister. We will continue to push Vietnam to improve its protection of human rights, to govern more fairly, because we care about those who are denied human rights, and it's the right thing to do. We will work with all of you to see the reform. Again, I thank you for holding this session to shine a much-needed spotlight on the human rights issues in Vietnam. Let's work cooperatively to improve the human rights conditions in Vietnam over the next year and for some time to come.
At this time, we request that Dr. Bader remain at the podium. We would like to present you with a token of our appreciation for your support and work, and I invite Dr. McCookman to join us in
know you and to work with you over the last 4 years on issues of constitutional concern. Your commitment, dedication, and determination to improve the human rights situation in Vietnam inspire all of us. And we thank you for all that you have done for people in Vietnam and especially for dissidents in Vietnam. And please accept our small bag of recognition as a token of our appreciation. And please give us your support. Thank you very much. The organization of the Vietnam Human Rights Day presented to Dr. Damian P. Hare, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, in appreciation of your extraordinary efforts to improve the human rights situation in Vietnam, May 11, 2013. We will do more days because the May 11 is the official. Thank you very much.
I'm pleased to introduce Congressman Frank Swope, who is the most senior of the 11 members of the House of Representatives from Virginia, he is serving his 32nd term in Congress. Congressman Swope sits on the powerful House Appropriations Committee, where he is the lead Republican on the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee. He is also the co-chairman of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, a bipartisan organization made up of more than 200 members of Congress who work together to raise awareness of international human rights. Please welcome Congressman Swope.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to be with you today. We gather, conditions are not very good in Vietnam. And I think we should gather not to celebrate, but frankly to think of how you should just demand that conditions change. There is regular repression of people of faith. The U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom, which I established along with Congressman Chris Smith 11 years ago, in its recently released report, I urge you to get a copy, came out the other day, once again recommended that Vietnam be designated a country of particular concern, CPC. In short, really, human rights does not exist in Vietnam. Religious institutions are required to apply for permits. Many of these applications, or most of these applications, are just ignored. Independent writers and bloggers and rights activists who question government policies, expose corruption, or call for democratic change are often subject of harassment, arrest, and even torture. Just yesterday, Reuters reported that bloggers and citizens engaged in peaceful dissent online who organized picnics to discuss human rights in public places. And several Vietnamese cities were violently attacked by police, and many were briefly detained. Some participants were in stiffs and bars. Last month, during the U.S.-Vietnam Human Rights Dialogue, the Vietnamese government prohibited the U.S. delegation from meeting with a number of human rights defenders, including lawyers, bloggers, in summary, things are very, very bad. President Reagan said that the words in the Constitution were a covenant, not only with the people of Philadelphia in 1787 and the people of Philadelphia in 1776 during the Declaration of Independence, it was a covenant with the entire world. That means they are a covenant with the people of Vietnam. And as of now, that covenant is being broken. I'm committed, and I hope you will too, to do everything you can to change this government as necessary to bring down this government whereby we can see human rights and religious freedom in Vietnam.
We are very pleased to have Ms. Libby Liu here with us today. She is the president of Radio Free Asia, a private nonprofit media company funded by the U.S. Congress through a grant by the Broadcasting Board of Governors. RFA acts as free press in countries without indigenous free press. Please join us in welcoming Ms. Libby Liu.
so much. I want to especially thank Dr. McCoy for inviting me again. This is a particularly important event for me and for everyone at Radio Free Asia. I very much want to express appreciation to the members of Congress who have been so consistently and deeply committed to the quality of life of the people inside Vietnam. It's my privilege to be here for Vietnam Human Rights Day, but I am saddened by how very far away human rights is from Vietnam. A small team from our grade just returned from a trip from Vietnam 3 days ago. This was a technology team from our Open Technology Fund project that is dedicated to internet freedom. They circulated among ordinary people, they met with ISP owners, they discussed abuses of freedom in Vietnam on so many fronts: land rights, religious freedoms, and human trafficking. A few of the observations the team said today is that they were surprised to find that the government is struggling to determine how to balance their desire for internet growth with their attempt to keep a firm control on citizen access online. The cell phone costs are low and it's driving deep penetration and adoption of the devices, but it is also enabling the government to monitor and surveil at a rate that is unprecedented. Some of the activists and dissidents that the team met with described the difference in the quality of their lives as they used to have human monitors with whom they actually grew quite familiar and followed their every move, and now they don't. They don't anymore because these people can sit inside giant server rooms and read everything that they write and listen to everything they say. The activists the RV team talked to tried a really tenuous path. They understand that government surveillance and monitoring are very real threats to the movement and to themselves, but this fear does not cow down. They continue to leverage the power of technology to rally support, post ground truth reporting, and organize locally, nationally, and internationally, as we see here. While the team was on the ground in Vietnam, they were there during that peaceful multi-city rally that took place to draw attention to human rights abuses in Vietnam. This peaceful rally resulted in the arrest of 2 Saigon-based activists, and when the family and friends gathered at the police station to demand the release, they were met with violence. Police thugs beat them, and the younger sister of one of the imprisoned activists lost 3 teeth in the beating. Instead of retreating, the first reaction of the victims was to go online. The supporting community posted information in real time online on Facebook and elsewhere to spread the truth in the face of violence and intimidation. It is this spirit of continued struggle and brave resistance that inspires us at Radio Free Asia daily. We regard it as our job to pick up the banner and spread the tune in solidarity with the people on the ground. It is a great privilege for us to do this job because without a free press, there are very few channels through which news and information can be passed. These abuses can go on in silence. But now that a quarter of the population in a recent poll has said that they've used the web within the last week, there's quite a bit of proliferation of information, and it scared the heck out of the Vietnamese government. Hallelujah. I want to close by saying that for every arrest, every harsh jail sentencing, every punishment, threat, intimidation, or pressure for self-censorship, Radio Free Asia will be there for the Vietnamese people. Thank you.
Rupert Abbott. Mr. Rupert Abbott is a researcher at Amnesty International, focusing on the Asia region and the countries of Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. He specializes in human rights, rule of law programming, human rights law, and international law. Mr. Rupert Abbott.
Hello everyone, thank you to the organising committee of the 19th annual commemoration of Vietnam Human Rights Day for inviting me to today's event. It's really good to be back. I'm honoured to be here, and it's great to reconnect with old friends and meet new people. So, as my friend said who introduced me, I work for Amnesty International. And for those who don't know us, Amnesty International is a global movement of around 3 million members, and we work to improve respect for human rights by researching and documenting human rights violations and campaigning for greater respect for human rights throughout the world. And we've been monitoring the human rights situation in Vietnam since the early 1970s, and our focus has been and still is on promoting freedom of expression, the right to express views and opinions freely, and also campaigning for what we call prisoners of conscience, those who are detained in prison for speaking out. As another speaker just mentioned, last Sunday on the 5th of May, we once again saw that freedom of expression in Vietnam is not respected. Young people attempting to hold outdoor picnics to discuss human rights peacefully in a number of cities in Vietnam were prevented from doing so. Several bloggers were arrested and beaten. They were all later released, but having reportedly been beaten during interrogation. And the following day, one of those arrested, the blogger Nguyen Hao Phi, returned to the police station where she had been held. And as the other speaker mentioned, her sister had her teeth knocked out. Her mother had a burning cigarette stuffed out of her face. Now, as we know, these appalling events are not unique. The Vietnamese authorities have continued to crack down on freedom of expression, trying to silence those who are simply trying to have a say in the development of their country and to peacefully promote human rights. Vietnam continues to be one of the worst violators of freedom of expression in the world, and one of the largest prisons for human rights defenders in Asia. Now, the list is very long. Father Nguyen Van Ly remains in prison, calling for respect for human rights. Bloggers, Nguyen Van Hai, known as Jua Kay, whose case President Obama raised, of course, along with Ta Phong Tan, Van Tan Hai, were sentenced to long prison terms for their blogs. Ta Phong Tan's mother died after setting herself on fire to protest her daughter's treatment. And Jua Kay's family is facing constant harassment, and indeed, they don't even know where Jua Kay is currently held. There are many others: entrepreneur Tran Quynh Quy Thuc, an IT engineer Nguyen Thi Trung, serving long sentences for calling for peaceful change. Tran Thi Thuy, labour rights activist Do Thi Minh Han are also locked up. And as Dr. Bear mentioned, songwriters Vo Minh Tri, known as Viet Cang, Tran Vu and Binh, were in prison for writing songs that promoted human rights. And as we know, there are many, many, many more. So Amnesty International is trying to reach out to Vietnam's government. We're trying to encourage them to respect and protect human rights. As some of you will know, my colleague Frank Januzzi from Amnesty International's office here in Washington, D.C. recently visited Vietnam to try to open up dialogue with the government there. And it was the first visit to Vietnam by Amnesty International since 1989. And we're calling on the Vietnamese government First of all, to release all of those prisoners of conscience, such as those I just listed. To respect and protect freedom of expression and the related rights of association and assembly. To repeal or amend the legislation that criminalises peaceful expression. And to reform the judiciary so that it's independent and it protects rather than punishes freedom of expression. We're also calling on other governments, including the United States government, to put pressure on Vietnam to respect and protect human rights. Now, we believe that the time is right, that there are a combination of factors coming together now that are creating a good opportunity to push for change in Vietnam. Some other countries in the region are seeing reform and improved respect for human rights. There are still many problems, but Myanmar, for example, does Vietnam want to be left behind and become the new pariah country in the region? We're seeing that the Vietnamese government is reaching out to improve relations with the US and the EU because they need to increase trade ties and investment. The economy is not doing very well. It's faltering. We're seeing that the government needs support from the US and others as it faces disputes with China, territorial disputes. And Vietnam, the government is looking to improve its international reputation and prominence as it seeks a seat on the UN Human Rights Council. These factors together are creating an opportunity for countries like the US to put pressure on the Vietnamese government to change. And there's another very important factor. Vietnamese people are eager for change and seem more willing to push for it. We're seeing it more and more at the events last weekend I referenced, the human rights picnics, where young people came together to discuss human rights. We can see it in the response to the consultation on the Constitution, an overwhelming response really. A group of academics who sent a detailed response. In the writing by bloggers, in the protest by farmers, for example, who are at risk of losing their land and livelihoods. People in Vietnam want change. So Amnesty International will continue to research and document human rights violations, campaign for improved respect for human rights in Vietnam, and we hope to work with many of you here today and others who want to improve the situation of human rights in Vietnam, to ensure that people in Vietnam can blog, can write songs, hold peaceful demonstrations, enjoy picnics without fear of arrest and violence. I'm being told it's time, so as I said last year, together we can all make a difference. Thank you very much.
I would like to introduce Charles Goosey, Director of the Office of Policy of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, the independent entity responsible for the U.S.-sponsored non-military international broadcasting, with authority for the International Broadcasting Bureau and its services, including the Voice of America. Please welcome Mr. Goosey.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for organizing the committee and Congress for allowing us to participate once again in this annual celebration, as we have done since the first. I am, as been told, Director of the Policy Office. We provide programming in the form of editorials within the U.S. government policy for Voice of America. Since 1943, the Voice of America has broadcast to Vietnam as one of our special target countries. Our mission is to provide balanced news and information to Vietnamese people while clearly and effectively presenting the policy of the United States government. Because the Hanoi regime tightly controls what flow of news and stifles comment and dissent on its policy, we take our job very seriously. Vietnamese people clearly recognize this and we have a growing audience of over 1 million people living here and abroad, tuning in on the radio and on the internet. In recent years, the United States and Vietnam have made great strides in normalizing relations in international trade. Economic growth has brought great improvement to the daily lives of many people. Similar progress is lacking, however, in human rights. While there have been some advances in this freedom, and only some, the government continues to place severe restrictions on freedom of speech and the press, does not tolerate criticism of itself or the Communist Party. For our government, differences over human rights are a recurring obstacle in an otherwise growing relationship. This friction has been noted in VOA's news coverage, and many of the editorials that lead the IGB policy office were broadcast over the last year. Our program covers the ongoing crackdown in Vietnam against religious leaders, political activists and writers who question government policy. Recent incidents that we focused attention on include the sentencing of democracy activists Bo Viet Dien and the conviction of 14 other bloggers, writers, social activists, and affiliated churches, and online publication of the Catholic Redemptionist Order. Also, the travel ban imposed on Sun Tran Hu, which prevented him from traveling to the United States to receive an award given to him, his father, and his brother by Human Rights Watch for their courageous advocacy of freedom of expression and democracy. Freedom of religion in general continues to be the subject of interest to our audiences, as well as the uneven interpretation and protection that we see in Vietnam, particularly at the provincial and village level. With recent reforms taking place in Burma, Vietnam is now exposed as the most repressive nation in Southeast Asia. Voice of America ensures that discussion of human rights in Vietnam is restricted to a once-a-year observance, worldwide day of the conversation. And this editorial was released last night for use by all VOA services. It's available, and you can see it on our VOA webpage. You go to the homepage, click on editorial. Next, the editorial reflects the views of the United States government. 19 years ago, the United States Congress designated May 11th as Vietnam Human Rights Day to highlight our nation's support for promoting and protecting basic internationally recognized freedoms in that Southeast Asian nation. To mark the occasion, a ceremony and a discussion forum will be held at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. today, May 9th, involving members of Congress, labor leaders, non-governmental groups, and members of the Vietnamese communities across our country. The date marks one of the most prominent episodes in human rights advocacy in Vietnam. It was on that day in 1990 that the Vietnamese physician, Dr. Nguyen Van Quay, and other activists published a program for nonviolent movement for human rights in Vietnam. The statement urged peaceful advocacy against repression and called for the communist government there to respect basic human rights, accept multi-party political system, and allow free and fair elections. The protest was peaceful and largely symbolic, but Dr. Quay and his colleagues were arrested, tried, and convicted of crimes against the state. In 2005, the doctor has been under virtual house arrest. Nor is he alone in suffering this kind of treatment. Every year, the United States encourages a nation-by-nation review of human rights around the world and sends a clear message that all governments have a responsibility to protect universal human rights. The recently released study on Vietnam found severe government restrictions on citizens' political rights, measures to limit citizens' civil liberties, and corruption in the judicial system and police continue to be significant problems there. Since the normalization of relations between the U.S. and Vietnam in 1995, ties between our two nations have increased dramatically. We now have a broad-based bilateral relationship ranging from increased cooperation on regional issues such as promoting maritime security, improving public health, providing disaster relief, to expanding trade and investment ties. However, working towards improving human rights in Vietnam still remains an integral part of this relationship with the United States. U.S. officials routinely make the point that America supports a strong Vietnam. If Vietnam's government gives greater say to its people, it will make its country even stronger. Thank you.
It is my honor to introduce Congressman Jerry Connolly. Congressman Jerry Connolly represents the 11th Congressional District of Virginia. He is a strong supporter of human rights and a good friend of the
Vietnamese American community. Please join me to welcome Congressman Jay Thompson.
Chào quý vị. Tonal language is very difficult for us, but it is great to be with you again, and remembering as well as celebrating human rights. Human rights, in this case, for all Vietnamese and for the country of Vietnam. You know, when America was created, it was an idea. It wasn't just geography. It was an idea, an abstract idea. Thomas Jefferson wrote it down. And he said, you know, these were rights that were inalienable, could not be taken away by any mortal. And he said, among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That third one really made people in the 18th century scratch their heads. Pursuit of happiness. That's a right? What does that mean? Well, we delineated it in the Constitution subsequently. It meant that you can, without fear, express your views. Believe what you choose and express it. You can organize without fear of the government knocking on the door or arresting you on the street for daring to give public witness to what you believe and what politics you wish to pursue. It meant that you could express yourself religiously and choose your own religion, or none at all, and still be welcome and not harassed. It meant that a press could operate and report on what's going on and hold officials accountable without being put in jail. These are freedoms still lacking in Vietnam today. If the government of Vietnam wishes to join the family of nations, if it wishes to be taken seriously, if it wishes to join with the United States and others in the Asia-Pacific region as part of a broader family, it must seriously acknowledge and respect these freedoms. And that's what we're honoring today. I'm proud to have once again nominated Dr. Quay for the Nobel Peace Prize for his courage in expressing his dissent. I'm proud to serve as a member of the Congressional Vietnam Human Rights Caucus, and I assure you, on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where I said we will continue to hold Vietnam to account, we will continue to speak out, we will continue to advocate on behalf of those whose voices otherwise would not be heard here in the international community and in Washington, D.C. God bless you. Thank you very much.
I'd like to say, many of you already know that there will be another day a lot like this on June 4th, Vietnam Advocacy Day, where both People SOS and some other organizations and individuals have been able to get some appointments with, with the House Republican leadership, a number of other individual members of Congress, representatives and senators, and they're trying to get hundreds of people to come and share with these representatives and senators and their staffs, and with other people in the State Department and other important people in our government, the human side of these issues, why it matters that we need to promote freedom and democracy in Vietnam. And so those of you who are not already in touch with some of the organizers, I know you all know how to get in touch with both people SOS, and I suggest that you can make it on June 4th. It would be a day well spent. There will also be some congressional hearings, I think, right around that time, as Congressman Connolly indicated. I always think, when I think about how to change things, whether it's to change a person or to change a government, I always think about a great economist who once said there are really only two laws of economics, and really only two laws of human behavior. Everything can be boiled down to what you subsidize, you get more of, and what you penalize, you get less of. Now, our government, for the last 20 years, since we normalized relations with the government of Vietnam, and even before that, when we were allowing the World Bank to go in and subsidize the government of Vietnam heavily, we have almost always been saying all the right things. We've been telling them they need to improve their human rights record. We've been telling them they need to treat their own people with a minimum level of decency. And yet, they haven't really done it. There hasn't been much improvement. There might be a little improvement, but then a lot of deterioration. And during all that, during all these imprisonments, during all these tortures, we've been continuing to subsidize the government of Vietnam, both through the international financial institutions and directly through a number of spigots that mainly subsidize trade and investment, but not only that. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need smart sanctions, not dumb sanctions, but we cannot keep on letting them think that they can do whatever they want to their own people and get whatever they want from the United States. Now, some people say that when we impose sanctions, we just irritate them and make things even worse. And that might be true at first, but what I believe, and almost instantly they're telling me it's time to be over, so I will just say a sentence or two. What I believe is that if the government of Vietnam could be convinced that they would get good things from the United States if and only if they treated their own people with a certain minimum level of decency, then they would get, we would see from them over the years, they wouldn't be perfect, but we'd have more good behavior and less bad behavior. So in order to transform the Vietnamese political culture, we need to transform our own political culture. We need to inform our foreign policy toward Vietnam with those two basic rules. To your cho Vietnam.
It's my pleasure to introduce the Honorable David Kramer, who is Executive Director of Freedom House, a U.S.-based organization that conducts research on democracy, political freedom, and human rights worldwide. Prior to joining Freedom House, he was the United States Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor from 2008 to 2009. Please welcome Honorable David Kramer.
Very much. It's a real honor for me to be here, Dr. Nguyen. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be at this event and delighted to see such a terrific turnout and such strong interest in human rights in Vietnam. I would like to see similar interest in Vietnam itself among people who have the ability to change the situation. Vietnam is a country that Freedom House takes great interest in. We, in our various reports, unfortunately find Vietnam at the low end of our scores. In our Freedom in the World report, Vietnam gets among the lowest scores for political rights, and on civil liberties, the score isn't much better. Similarly, on the Press Freedom Survey that Freedom House just released 2 weeks ago. Vietnam falls into the bottom 10% category, right in the same league with Saudi Arabia and Somalia, and not far behind are Bahrain and Syria. That's not a company Vietnam should be proud to keep. And the Freedom of the Net report that we will be releasing this coming September, but based on last year's report, Vietnam also falls into the bottom category when it comes to freedom of the net. I cite these rankings to underscore the need for a vast improvement in the human rights situation in Vietnam. It is not only in the interest of everyone in this room, it's in the interest of everyone who lives in the country of Vietnam itself. It's in the interest of the entire region and the entire world. Vietnam is too important a country for the situation in human rights to stay where it is. We need to see much greater respect for human rights. We need to see the end of persecution and prosecution of bloggers and internet freedom activists. Bloggers face imprisonment, torture while in prison, non-legal harassment, physical surveillance, false charges against family members. The list goes on and on. A famous blogger case came about in the end of last year. The arrest of Hanoi-based human rights lawyer Lee Kwok Kwan for tax evasion shortly after he wrote an article criticizing the government, and he's still in detention. His case, as well as the cases of many other activists, are ones that we need to raise. We want to see Vietnam respect human rights. We want to see toleration for political discourse from civil society actors, and end to the jailing and harassment of bloggers and human rights defenders. We want to see prosecutions against religious freedom advocates also come to an end. This is in the interest of the United States. This is in the interest of Vietnam. This is in the interest of all who want to live in freedom with respect to human rights. I thank you for letting me know.
I would like to welcome Mr. Alan Zhang. Mr. Alan Zhang is the founder and president of Sound of Hope Radio Network since 2003. He led the development of Sound of Hope Radio Network, the largest non-government radio broadcasting into China. He is also an expert in Internet freedom technology, serving as vice president of UltraSurf, which brings free and uncensored information to China and other communist nations through the Internet. Please welcome Mr. Alan Zhang.
Thank you, the host. My talk will be very short, but it will be very specific too. About 3 years ago, I was here actually at the same Human Rights Day celebration for Vietnam, and I talked about the Internet Freedom Project, meaning building software that's able to penetrate the firewall built by the Chinese government, as well as the Vietnam government. We were able at that time to bring out 300 million visitors from Vietnam every month. Okay, so today, with that project still going on, and see this very good picture? Those are, if you see this in close range, this 85 meter, 250 feet tall, 250 foot tall, shortwave broadcasting tower based in Taiwan. Okay, built in Cold War time. And they are to be demolished because Taiwan and China are playing peace these days. But those towers are strategic resource that can bring information into China to non-internet people. So you're talking about firewall penetration software to target the internet people, and then less targeting the non-internet people. This is almost like a total solution to bring information into totalitarian regime. As Thomas Jefferson said, information is the currency of the freedom. Okay, as we push information into Vietnam and China every day, things will change. That's how it happened to the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Europe bloc. And the Radio Free Europe and the Liberty Radio working for 40 years
That's how we come to collapse of those communist regime. So here, I'm just bringing this presentation to you. I and my team are working just tirelessly in the last 10 years to bring a total solution to the information blockade by those regimes. And I really feel at home coming here and speaking with you. And then I know that you have a lot of relationship with the Congress, and including people sitting here. And if you can help us, retain those powers, we can put them into use virtually in the matter of a couple of months. And that they can begin to be done too. Okay? And including setting up your own radio station, radio studio. I can help you just like broadcasting in Washington, D.C. and get her in Vietnam. That's the specific project we're talking about. And here, I really, just again, I just feel at home being here because the people in the two countries share the same pain. And if you can work together, I look forward to it. And actually, I'm very optimistic about the future because information brings change. It's inevitable. Thank you so very much.
Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Kuching. He is the Vice President of the Tibetan Dokam Tusi Ganjuk Movement of the Tibetan Independence. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kuching.
Respected senators and congressmen, distinguished guests, and respected witness friends, I'm very happy to be here on occasion of the 19th commemoration day of the human rights. As we are here to talk about commemorating the Human Rights Day in Vietnam, but taking the opportunity, I would say it was very important on this issue we talk about the genuine human rights wherever it has been violated. So, under the Vietnam and the Tibetan issue, which both are under the suppression of the same kind of regime, that is like the one which we both recognize that is under the Chinese Communist influence in both countries, Tibet and Vietnam. So I would like to touch a little bit example, taking the opportunity of this event to say that, just to talk about the Human Rights Day, first, fundamentally we have to know what are the basic human rights. The basic human rights are people's freedom of speech and freedom of the movement. For that, I would like to share a little example. So far, in our recent struggle against the Communist Chinese, we have 170 people already self-immolated. And then I would like to say, when we say 170 people self-immolated, I would like to say, all demonstrate that how they did that. The reasons they self-immolated themselves was, we're not talking about the whole life or whole state of the life. The life inside or under the communist regime is very difficult. In order to even live one day's life to day-to-day life, it's very difficult.
현지에서 내던 오늘 공도 토락하는 일에 보내서는 다른 나라에 산이처럼 머무르기 가면 나오는 건데 아메리카 세아디기 건도가 단단히 잡혀지기를 미 통해하기 지혜도 공도 하거나 난도가 뭐니 잡혀지라 그랬으면 이제 소유 돈이 걔네 아니 자나 공부하고 먹어지는
The reasons people, those who have self-immolated, when they demonstrated it, they want to share their feeling. They want to spread their feeling why they have to or take such a measures. The reasons they are self-immolating themselves are sending a message outside to the country where people, in a free country, where people respect about the human rights, such as a country like the United States. They are showing an example and at the same time expecting that people living in a free country where they respect human rights, they will understand their pain and the sufferings.
그래서 시바이는 국제레스는 뭐라 아니 진나마 개론 집에 아니 그런 거나 빅 그런 거
And for example, if you remember correctly, in 1963, a monk in Vietnam also self-immolated by the name of like a big quick, but we're not pronouncing it correctly, but the monk had also demonstrated that.
이제 남남 민망 믹시에 들어요. 농구직 믹시에 들어요. 다가나는 아니 도네시 아니 아랍 스프링 단다 비가라 아니 미지 아니 클리메지나 아니 남는 게 좀 너무 믹시에
And because of that monk's revolution, there have been quite awakened a lot of people, but it has not completely done the job, but like in more or less it has spread a lot of message outside, and people have understood. At the same time, the same token, that recent in our memory, in the recent Arab Spring, which happened in last year, we started from Tunisia, where the street vendor like self-immolating himself. The message went out and sparked all over the world, and it getting support.
베트남아 찍마 쥐마 야리기도 나도 야리기 딘도다 나데가 산고 그라마카 거래 딘도도 나도 로아미 없단기 소바카이나레 예진이 예버튼 겐키비 토네 나데가 라노니 나오나 겐키토니.
So, as far as the safe concern, which we want to share here, the cases of self-immolations is not only in ones and tens. In Tibetan cases in the recent history, there have already been 117 people self-immolated. And when such a thing happens, as the self-immolated themselves, they expect, we, the people living outside with a good conscience, it becomes a responsibility for us as well.
그 도도도도도니 감장이 나마 타마라 왜 나라 산고 그라마메 바다 데리는 돌아 산고 바이나레 가레이나 약전나로나 다나지 군나비나레 어이나 로비 토탄 메사게 사자텔라 타마 겐기를 도니 이나로나 생긴 사담이 뜻이나.
Without taking any further time, I would like to conclude with saying that, as earlier speakers has mentioned about the importance of the freedom of speech and so forth, and human rights, etc. in Vietnam. But at the same time, I will take the opportunity and say while we are doing this wonderful, great thing, we should keep in mind that there are still people in many countries who are still suffering where human rights have been violated. So, if for Vietnam, human rights should be taken to a much more grander scale, think about more human beings in the world, more people. Thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce Mr. Harry Wu. Mr. Harry Wu is the founder of the Laogai Research Foundation, an organization dedicated to documenting and exposing systematic abuse of human rights in China, with a focus on the forced labor camps. Please join me to welcome Mr. Harry Wu.
was very happy to be here because the Vietnamese and Chinese, both of them, we are not only the neighbor, but we also are friends and always have the friendship. I want to remind everybody that recently Chinese President Xi Jinping said he feels when 1991 Soviet Communist Party dismissed, why at that moment nobody fight against it? That's a very stupid idea. The Soviet system is a big empire. The 16 republics joined together, and the communist system in the Soviet Union is very important. But when Gorbachev went to the People's Congress and said, what should we do? Should we continue our communism revolution? And everyone said, no. And the communist party dismissed. But Xi Jinping said, why does nobody at that moment fight against it? That telling the people, today, the Chinese Communist Party facing the same situation, and that's why Xi Jinping ought to become someone to fight against it. We do have to know Soviet is the first country of the communists in the world. Finally, 1998 dismissed. And Soviet, the Chinese Communist Party is soon will dismiss too. Today, the world, there's 4 countries, including North Korea and is a communist country. But I believe there's some systems very soon will dismiss. I hope the relationship between China and Vietnam will go better. Thank you.
Please join me in welcoming Mr. Huyen Hu, who is representing the Hoa Hao Buddhist Temple.
Dear guests and ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you very much for all of you from to support for human rights in Vietnam. And we want to talk with our community about some of you. Thank you. Kính thưa ông Minh Đồng, Ủy viên Ban Hành Đô, kính thưa bác sĩ Nguyễn Quốc Quân, Chủ tịch Phong trào Ca Đào Nhật Bản, và kính thưa tất cả quý vị chủ tịch cộng đồng cũng như là quý vị đoàn thể ở khắp nơi trở về đây tham dự ngày hôm nay. Chúng tôi xin khẩn thiết trong cái tinh thần của người Việt Nam, mặc dù ở trong cái lĩnh vực tôn giáo, chúng tôi khẩn thiết kêu gọi tất cả các anh em chúng ta hãy xích nhau lại gần, chúng ta tạo thêm một cái sức mạnh vững vàng hơn để chúng ta giải thể chế độ cộng sản trong một ngày thật gần. Ngày đó hy vọng đến chúng ta rất là ngắn gọn. Chúng tôi chỉ trong cái tinh thần tôn giáo, chúng tôi cầu xin quý vị dần dần lại nhau và tạo thêm sức mạnh trong cũng như ngoài nước để hỗ trợ giải thể chế độ cộng sản hiện hữu để làm đài đọa cho 90% dân Việt Nam chúng ta tại bây giờ. Xin trân trọng kính chào những lời.
Next, I'd like to read a letter sent from Baxi, or Dr. Lan Quế from Vietnam. He also can't be here today, but we would like to send this letter to express some of his sentiments, so I can read it in its entirety. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to address you on the 19th commemoration of Vietnam Human Rights Day. The internet age and modern means of transportation have truly connected people around the globe into a community. Economic globalization, cultural exchanges, and tolerance among people have made significant significant progress in human relations. Looking at life in democratic countries, people in oppressed states have stood up and demanded their human rights. A number of oppressive states in Eastern Europe, North Africa, and Middle East have collapsed or have changed to show respect for human rights, as most recently seen in Burma. Yet, a number of dictatorships obsessed with power and privilege still stubbornly cling to the discredited and discarded model of totalitarian governance. My country, Vietnam, is a case in point. Since 1986, Vietnam is said to have opened up to trade with the world and foreign investment poured in, especially after the signing of the U.S.-Vietnam bilateral trade agreement and after joining the World Trade Organization. Vietnam's economy achieved some encouraging outcomes and a very dynamic but young, quote-unquote, middle class was formed. There should have been accompanying political liberalization to enable all citizens, especially the young, to participate in the development of the country. However, the communist rulers in Hanoi, fearful of losing their monopoly of political power, instead increased oppression and intimidation of anyone harboring different thoughts, which is exemplified by the crackdown on bloggers and violent seizures of farmers' land. In the beginning of 2013 alone, more than 40 bloggers have been persecuted, and many farmers who protested against land grabs have been imprisoned. It will get worse when the communist rulers intensify their oppressive system to muzzle all voices of dissent and prohibit group petitions against grievances. The condition of human rights in Vietnam has worsened significantly, causing concern for all walks of life. Recently, the U.S. Department, the European Union, Department of Foreign Affairs of the United Kingdom, Human Rights Watch, Reporters Without Borders, Amnesty International, and Paris Bar Association have all voiced strong recommendations that Hanoi respect human rights of the Vietnamese people. We are also aware that the U.S. Congress is constraining debate and enactment of legislation supporting the struggle of human rights for Vietnamese people, with special emphasis on internet freedom and religious freedom, as independent churches such as the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam, Cao Dai and Ha Hao Buddhist Church, have been systematically violated, isolated, harassed, and persecuted. It is more important than ever that the Vietnamese government change to respect the human dignity of her people. People must have the right to protest when they are mistreated or governed cruelly. We highly appreciate such legislation because it reinforces the principle that violation of human rights anywhere, Vietnam included, could be sanctioned by the U.S. Congress. We strongly believe that advocating for human rights from forums such as this one today in the United States, in the U.S. Congress, will strengthen the will of dissidents and activists and show Hanoi communists that they are being condemned strongly by the court of human conscience. Last but not least, with perseverance of the democracy movement inside Vietnam, in concert with the freedom trend of our time, and united with the dedication of activists present at this ceremony, we strongly believe that Vietnam will change for the better to become, quote-unquote, the second Burma of Southeast Asia, and that the universal values of human rights will blossom even in formidable fortresses of tyranny such as China, North Korea, Syria, and Cuba. Best wishes to you and have a successful commemoration. Sincerely, Dr. Nguyen Gia Quế, Saigon, Vietnam, May 9, 2013.